All right, so today we were going deep on Friedrich Nietzsche's Beyond Good and Evil. You know, this book, it's a tough one, but I know you're looking to get to the heart of it. And Nietzsche, he's definitely known for challenging ideas.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
This deep dive, I think, is going to unpack some of his most groundbreaking and maybe even controversial concepts.
Yeah, this book, it's a real, it's a journey for the mind. Like, Nietzsche is almost like handing you this map to, like, a whole different way of thinking about, well, about everything.
And he doesn't waste any time.
Yeah.
You know, right from the get-go, he's taking on this idea of the prejudices of philosophers. So basically, like every major thinker who came before him.
He's basically saying, don't take anything for granted.
Yeah.
Not even the wisdom of, like, the ages, right?
Yeah.
He's really suspicious of, like, the motivations of philosophers, right? He thinks that they're often driven by their own, like, hidden agendas and this lust for power. And it's all kind of masked as this, like, love of knowledge, you know?
So he's saying philosophers are just as human as the rest of us.
Yeah.
With their own biases and agendas.
Yeah, totally.
Which, I mean, we all have those, right?
Absolutely.
It makes you wonder how much of what we think of as like the truth is really just somebody else's perspective.
Yeah.
You know, like dressed up as fact.
Exactly, yeah. And he uses this, it's a really funny analogy to make this point, right? He compares philosophers to that doctor in Moliere's play.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Who explains, like, how opium puts you to sleep by virtue of a faculty.
Right.
Right.
Which is like saying opium makes you sleepy because it has sleepiness powers.
Right.
Which doesn't actually explain anything. It's just, it's a circular, like, argument.
Yeah, that makes sense. But how does this all like play out for us, you know, in our daily lives?
Well, I mean, think about it, right? Like, how often do we just accept what experts say, you know, without really questioning, like, what are their motives? What are their biases? You know? And so Nietzsche, he wants us to be critical thinkers, right? He wants us to really look beyond the surface and ask, like, you know, okay, whose interests are actually being served by this idea?
So like the next time I'm, I don't know, listening to a podcast or reading an article by some like, you know, big shot expert, I should be thinking, oh, okay, that's interesting, but what's your angle here?
Exactly, exactly. And that like questioning attitude, that's what Nietzsche calls the mark of the free spirit.
Oh, right. The free spirit. Yeah. Someone who's willing to challenge conventional wisdom, right? And kind of carve their own path. But doesn't Nietzsche also like warn that this path can be like pretty dangerous?
He does. He compares the free spirit to someone who's like entering a labyrinth guarded by a minotaur.
Oh, wow.
It's a pretty powerful image, right?
Yeah.
The labyrinth represents like the complexities of knowledge, and the minotaur symbolizes like the dangers of straying too far from like accepted truths.
So the free spirit risks, you know, isolation, misunderstanding, maybe even getting lost in their own pursuit of knowledge.
Yeah.
That's a pretty steep price to pay for thinking differently.
It is.
What do you think? Is it worth it?
I mean, Nietzsche would say it's the only path to like true self-discovery.
Yeah.
But it's a question like each of us has to grapple with. Like, how much are we willing to risk for the sake of intellectual freedom?
That is a big question for sure. Okay,
Yeah.
so this journey of the free spirit, right? This often leads them to kind of clash with traditional morality.
Yeah.
And that's where Nietzsche's distinction between master morality and slave morality comes into play.
Exactly.
Can you break that down for us? Because this is one of the like most mind-blowing ideas in this whole book.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's like a total rethinking of how we view good and evil. So master morality, as Nietzsche sees it, it's the morality of like the strong.
Yeah.
The noble, the creators, and it values things like strength, power, ambition, self-affirmation.
So kind of like the morality of like a warrior or a ruler or something.
Exactly, exactly. They're the ones who determine like their own values based on what they, you know, deem to be like life-affirming and empowering.
Okay.
Now, slave morality, on the other hand, this is born out of resentment.
Okay.
It's the morality of the weak, the oppressed, the followers, you know.
So they value things like humility, compassion, selflessness.
Yeah, exactly. But, you know, the thing is, Nietzsche kind of suggests that those values are actually a way for the weak to control the strong.
Oh, interesting.
Right? You know?
So if I'm getting this right, Nietzsche's saying that the classic, like, nice guy, right?
Right.
You know, the guy who's always putting others first and downplaying his own needs, like that could actually be a manifestation of slave morality.
That's a really, really insightful observation. Yeah, Nietzsche would probably agree. And he actually saw this playing out in the rise of Christianity, which he believed promoted a slave morality that ultimately like weakened Western civilization.
Wow. Okay. So it's a bold statement. And it makes you think about like all these seemingly good values, right, that we're taught, like
Yeah.
humility, compassion, selflessness. Are they always as virtuous as they seem?
Right?
Or are they sometimes used to kind of manipulate and control?
That's exactly the kind of question that Nietzsche wants us to ask. He wants us to really examine like the foundations of our moral beliefs and be wary of any system that values like weakness over strength.
Yeah, very interesting. So this whole like master versus slave morality idea,
Yeah.
this seems to also tie into Nietzsche's critique of his own time, doesn't it? Like
Yeah.
he was deeply critical of modern society.
Oh, yeah.
And he saw it as kind of a symptom of cultural decline.
Absolutely. He believed that things like, democracy, egalitarianism, the rise of science, he saw all of these as kind of like leveling forces that were weakening like the human spirit. He saw them as contributing to like a kind of mediocrity,
Okay.
a herd mentality that stifled like individuality and creativity.
So he wasn't exactly a fan of the everyone gets a trophy mentality.
Not really, no. He believed in striving for excellence, in pushing beyond the limits of like conventional morality.
Okay.
And he even saw nationalism as kind of this like problematic force,
Yeah.
something that divided people rather than uniting them.
And he was especially concerned about the future of Europe. I think there's this one quote where he says, the most unambiguous signs declaring that Europe wants to be one are either overlooked or willfully and mendaciously reinterpreted. What's he getting at there?
He believed that that blind nationalism, with its focus on narrow like tribal identities, was actually preventing Europe from reaching its full potential. He dreamed of this kind of unified Europe, a place where like the strongest and most creative minds could flourish.
So even way back then, he was kind of warning about the dangers of what we now call like populism and the rise of extreme nationalism.
Yeah, it's amazing, right?
Yeah.
How relevant his critiques still feel today.
Yeah, it really is. He was like, it's like he was a canary in the coal mine, warning us about these trends that have, become even more pronounced in the 21st century.
Totally.
This whole conversation is really making me think about the last time I got into like a heated online debate with someone,
Yeah.
Were we really disagreeing about like the facts? Or was it more about our own like individual interpretations based on our own experiences and beliefs?
That's a great question. And it actually leads us right into another key concept, Nietzsche's idea of perspectivism.
Right, perspectivism.
Yeah.
This is where Nietzsche really blows your mind.
Mm-hmm.
He argues that there's no such thing as objective truth.
Right.
Only different perspectives based on our own experience, our own interpretations.
Exactly. He's saying we can't just assume that there's like one right way of seeing things,
Right.
Our understanding of the world is always filtered through, our own unique lens.
So wait, if there's no objective truth, I mean, does that mean anything goes? Like, how do we make decisions or judge what's right and wrong if everything is just a matter of perspective?
That's the challenge that Nietzsche throws down to us. And he doesn't really offer any easy answers.
Yeah.
But he does give us some tools for navigating this really complex terrain.
Okay, like what? Give me an example.
Well, he emphasizes the importance of psychology
Okay.
in understanding like human behavior. He believes that our beliefs and values aren't just like products of pure reason, but they're also deeply shaped by our emotions, our desires, and our unconscious drives.
So it's not enough to just look at what people say or do.
Yeah.
We also have to understand like the underlying motivations that are driving their actions.
Exactly.
This is where things get really interesting.
It does. And then to add another layer to this, even Nietzsche's like writing style itself reflects this idea of perspectivism.
You mean like his use of those short, punchy statements?
Yes.
The aphorisms.
Exactly. He packs so much meaning into like these little bursts of insight. It's like he's offering these glimpses of truth from multiple angles, or
Right.
acknowledging that no single perspective can really capture like the full complexity of reality.
It's like he's throwing these intellectual grenades and then
Yeah.
just stepping back to like
Ugh.
let them explode in our minds
Aha. Yeah, that's a great analogy.
and forcing us to kind of like piece together these fragments of truth.
Exactly. And it forces us to like become active participants
Yeah.
in the process of understanding.
Right.
Right. We can't just passively absorb his ideas. We have to wrestle with them,
Right.
make connections, and draw our own conclusions.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, this is a lot to take in, but I feel like I'm starting to see how all these pieces fit together. The suspicion of philosophers, the idea of the free spirit, the clash of these different moralities, the nature of truth, even his unique writing style. It's all like connected.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
And there's still so much more to explore. We haven't even touched on like Nietzsche's complex relationship with his own country, Germany, his analysis of art and music, his concept of the will to power.
Oh, right.
Oh,
Well, it sounds like we have our work cut out for us. I'm ready for more, though. How about you?
absolutely. Yeah, there's so much to unpack still. So let's maybe dive into Nietzsche's views on Germany. I mean, he had a real love-hate relationship with his homeland, right?
Yeah, it's like you can totally see that in Beyond Good and Evil. Like he clearly admires, the German capacity for deep thought and these big philosophical systems, but at the same time, he's also like criticizing, what he sees as their tendency towards like sentimentality and romanticism.
Exactly. Yeah, he saw his fellow Germans, as capable of producing like these brilliant minds like Beethoven and Goethe, but also prone to kind of getting lost in this like cloudy, nostalgic nationalism.
Right.
And you can actually see this tension like playing out in his analysis of German music.
Oh yeah, that's right. There's that whole part where he's like praising Beethoven and Mozart, but then he's criticizing Schumann,
Yeah.
for being too romantic and nationalistic. It seemed kind of random to me at first, but now I'm starting to see like the connection.
Yeah, Nietzsche was really onto something there. I mean, he saw this link between, like the excessive emotionalism in certain types of German music and the rise of nationalism. It's like he's warning us that, unbridled sentimentality can be like a dangerous thing, especially when it's tied to like national identity.
So he's saying we should be wary of letting our emotions, kind of cloud our judgment when it comes to like ideas about, nation and belonging.
Totally. Yeah. He's really urging us to be like critical thinkers, even when it comes to something as deeply personal as our cultural heritage. And it's interesting, how he contrasts German music with French Romanticism, right? Yeah. He sees the surprising kind of kinship between them. Like they're both expressing this yearning for a unified, like European soul.
Wow, that's fascinating. It makes you wonder what Nietzsche would say about, the state of Europe today.
Yeah.
Do you think like he would be happy with the European Union?
That's a good question. It's hard to say. I mean, he was, a fierce individualist, so he might have had some issues with, like the bureaucracy and the centralization of the EU, right?
Yeah.
But I think he definitely longed for a Europe that kind of transcended these narrow national identities, and embraced like its shared cultural heritage.
Yeah, it makes me think about how like music and art can connect people across, across borders. I remember going to a concert once where this amazing cellist from Russia was playing Bach, and it was like this incredible emotional experience. Like it just totally transcended any kind of language barrier. It really felt like we were all kind of connected through the music.
Exactly. Yeah. Art has this amazing power to like speak to something universal within us, right? Something that goes beyond, politics and national boundaries. And I think Nietzsche, he really recognized that.
Okay. So we've talked about Nietzsche's skepticism towards, philosophers, the journey of the free spirit, the clash between master and slave morality, his critique of modernity, his idea of perspectivism. But there's this one big concept that we haven't really explored yet, and that's the will to power.
Ah, yes, the will to power. This is one of Nietzsche's most important and most misunderstood ideas. And it's not about like brute force or domination the way that we might typically think about power. It's something much more like fundamental and pervasive.
So it's not about like conquering nations or amassing wealth.
Yeah.
What is it about then? Break it down for me.
Okay, so for Nietzsche, the will to power it's like the basic driving force behind all living things. It's the urge to like grow, to expand, to overcome obstacles, to create.
Okay.
It's this like desire to shape and influence the world around us, to leave our mark on the universe, you know?
So even something like, creating art or music or coming up with a new scientific theory,
Yeah.
that could be seen as an expression of the will to power.
Absolutely, yeah. It's about that creative impulse, right?
Yeah.
That like striving for self-actualization and expression. And Nietzsche believed that the will to power could manifest in both, healthy and unhealthy ways.
Okay, give me an example of what you mean by that. Like, what's a healthy versus an unhealthy expression of this will to power?
Okay, so a healthy expression might be, someone who dedicates their life to mastering a craft or to, pushing the boundaries of human knowledge or creativity.
Okay.
Right. They're driven by a desire to create, to excel, to leave something, beautiful or meaningful behind. Now, an unhealthy expression, think about someone who's driven by resentment or bitterness or a need for revenge, right?
Right.
Their will to power is directed towards destruction, towards domination, towards, control over others.
So the will to power itself isn't good or bad. It's all about like how it's directed.
Exactly. And Nietzsche believed that in a society, where traditional values and hierarchies are kind of crumbling,
Right.
this will to power can become particularly dangerous if it doesn't have like healthy outlets.
So in a world without these clear, guidelines for how to live a meaningful life, people might kind of grasp at power in all the wrong ways.
That's exactly his concern, yeah. Without a strong sense of purpose or direction, the will to power can become, twisted and destructive. And this actually leads us to one of the most provocative and controversial aspects of Nietzsche's thought, which is his critique of religion.
Right.
And particularly Christianity.
Oh, yeah. This is where Nietzsche really, really stirs the pot.
Yeah.
I mean, he famously declared that, God is dead, right?
Right.
But what did he actually mean by that?
Well, it's important to understand that Nietzsche wasn't making a literal statement about the existence of God. He was talking about the decline of religion as this like dominant force in Western culture.
So he was basically saying that with the rise of, science and secularism, people were no longer looking to religion for answers or for moral guidance.
Exactly. And he saw this shift as both, liberating and terrifying.
Oh, interesting.
Right, liberating because it freed humans from the shackles of dogma and blind faith.
Right.
But also terrifying because it left this huge spiritual void.
Yeah.
If God is dead, then what gives our lives meaning? What are we striving for?
So he wasn't necessarily like celebrating the death of God.
No.
He was more concerned about like what would fill that void.
Exactly. And this is where his concept of the Übermensch comes in.
Right, the Übermensch.
Yeah, it's often translated as like the Superman or the Overman.
Okay.
It's one of Nietzsche's most famous and most misunderstood ideas.
Yeah, I've always been kind of confused about the Übermensch. Is it like a specific person? Like,
Yep.
Is this a leader who's going to emerge and like save humanity?
Not exactly. No, the Übermensch isn't a literal person or like a blueprint for a future society.
Right.
It's more of like an ideal, a direction for humanity to strive towards. It's about embracing the fullness of human potential. Creating your own values and living a life of passion and purpose in a world without God.
So it's about like overcoming the limitations of conventional morality and kind of forging your own path. That sounds a lot like the free spirit we were talking about earlier.
You're right to see the connection there. Yeah, the Übermensch kind of embodies the spirit of the free spirit taken to its like ultimate conclusion. They are, self-creating individuals. They don't rely on external sources of meaning or morality.
Okay, so it's about creating your own values,
Yeah.
living authentically. But doesn't that sound kind of, I don't know, selfish? Like if everyone just does their own thing, wouldn't society just fall apart?
That's a common criticism of Nietzsche for sure.
Yeah.
But he would argue that true individuality doesn't mean like rejecting all social bonds or acting in this purely egotistical way. It's about becoming the best version of yourself, and that often involves contributing to the world in a meaningful way.
So it's not about like isolating yourself from others. It's about finding a way to express your individuality within society.
Exactly, yeah. And it's also important to note that, Nietzsche's ideas about the Übermensch have been kind of twisted and misused by some pretty unsavory characters throughout history.
Oh, right, like the Nazis and their whole idea of like a master race.
Yeah, exactly. Nietzsche's sister, who was a committed nationalist, she actually kind of distorted his work to fit her own agenda. But a careful reading of Nietzsche shows that he was totally opposed to these kinds of like simplistic and dangerous interpretations of human potential.
So the Übermensch isn't about like dominating others or creating some kind of elite class.
No, not at all. It's about self-mastery, about pushing beyond the limits of what we think is possible for ourselves as individuals.
This whole conversation is really blowing my mind. But there's one thing that's been kind of nagging at me. Nietzsche talks a lot about, self-overcoming and pushing beyond our limits. But how do we actually do that?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that Nietzsche grapples with throughout his work. And he doesn't offer like a simple formula or set of instructions.
So it's not like there's a 10-step program to becoming the Übermensch.
Nope, not at all. It's more about a constant process of questioning, of challenging yourself and striving to live in accordance with your own values,
So it's more about the journey than the destination.
Exactly. And Nietzsche believed that the journey itself is what gives life meaning.
This idea of self-overcoming, it reminds me of when I was trying to learn how to play the guitar. It was so frustrating at first. Like, my fingers just wouldn't cooperate.
Mm-hmm.
But I kept practicing. I kept pushing myself. And eventually, I started to get it. And the feeling of accomplishment, of overcoming that initial frustration. It was incredible.
That's a perfect example. It's that same drive, that same will to overcome obstacles and push beyond your perceived limitations that Nietzsche is talking about.
So even something as simple as learning a new skill can be a form of self-overcoming.
Absolutely, yeah. And those small victories, those moments of growth and self-discovery, those are what make life worth living, according to Nietzsche.
I like that. So what's next on our Nietzschean adventure? What else is kind of lurking in the depths of Beyond Good and Evil?
Oh, there's still plenty to explore, but one thing that really strikes me about Nietzsche is just like his psychological insight. Like he seems to have this uncanny ability to kind of just like dissect human motivation,
right?
Expose like the hidden drives behind our beliefs and actions. It's kind of unsettling, but also fascinating.
It really is. It's like he's peeling back the layers of the onion and like revealing all these messy, complex contradictions of like the human psyche.
Totally.
And that psychological depth is part of what makes his work so relevant even today.
Yeah.
We're still wrestling with these same like fundamental questions about who we are, why we do the things we do, what it means to live a good life.
Absolutely. And Nietzsche, by challenging those assumptions, and by forcing us to kind of confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves,
right,
he gives us some really valuable tools for navigating that complexity.
Okay, before we wrap things up, there's one more thing I kind of want to dig into a little bit. Nietzsche's writing style. It's so unique. It's not like those dense academic philosophical treatises that like put you to sleep after 2 pages.
You're talking about his aphorisms, right?
Yeah. Those short punchy statements that are just like packed with meaning.
Exactly.
It's like he throws out these intellectual firecrackers and they just explode in your mind.
Yeah.
And you're kind of left to pick up the pieces and make sense of them.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it's deliberate. Nietzsche was a master stylist. He wanted to shake things up. He wanted to write in a way that was both engaging and provocative. He believed that traditional philosophy was just too dry, too systematic, too like weighed down by jargon. He wanted to write something that would jolt people out of their intellectual slumber.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. There's nothing worse than slogging through a book that feels like it was written for robots,
Right, exactly. And Nietzsche understood that. He wanted to write for a wider audience. He wanted to make philosophy accessible and relevant to everyday life. And his aphoristic style was a way to do that. It forces you to actively engage with the text, to connect the dots and draw your own conclusions.
Yeah, it's like he's saying, here are some pieces of the puzzle. Now go figure out how they fit together.
Exactly. He doesn't want to like spoon feed you answers.
Right.
He wants you to wrestle with his ideas to make them your own, and that process, that struggle for understanding, that's where the real learning happens.
Yeah, it's like a mental workout,
Totally.
And speaking of working out, Nietzsche was really big on this idea of self-overcoming, right?
Yes.
Do you think that applies to his writing as well? Like he was constantly challenging himself to think in new and more profound ways.
Absolutely. Nietzsche saw self-overcoming as this lifelong process, this constant striving and to become more than you were yesterday. And I think that's reflected in his writing as well. He's always kind of pushing the boundaries of language, experimenting with new forms and styles, and challenging himself to express his ideas in the most powerful and evocative way possible.
This is making me think about one of my favorite aphorisms from Beyond Good and Evil.
Oh yeah.
He says, "Every profound spirit needs a mask. What's more, a mask is constantly growing around every profound spirit." What do you make of that one?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think Nietzsche is suggesting that true depth of thought is often misunderstood, even by those who are closest to us. The profound thinker, by venturing beyond conventional wisdom, they risk being misjudged, even ostracized. And the mask, in a sense, becomes a form of self-protection.
It's like he's saying that the price of true intellectual freedom is often isolation.
Yeah.
Like the more original your ideas are, the more likely you are to be met with resistance or even hostility.
Totally. Yeah. And that's a message that really resonates, I think, with anyone who's ever felt like an outsider, anyone who's dared to think differently.
This whole conversation has really been a journey.
It has.
We've covered so much ground from Nietzsche's critique of traditional morality to his vision of the Übermensch and everything in between. And I feel like I have a much deeper understanding of Beyond Good and Evil now.
Me too. And that's really just the beginning. Nietzsche is one of those thinkers that you can revisit again and again throughout your life and always find, something new, something challenging, something that kind of sparks your thinking in unexpected ways.
It's like he planted a seed in our minds, and it's going to keep growing and evolving as we continue to kind of engage with his ideas.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes him such a timeless and vital thinker,
Yeah. Well, I think it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final thought from Nietzsche. He says the most valuable insights are the ones that destroy something. So what has this deep dive into Beyond Good and Evil destroyed for you? What assumptions have been challenged? What new perspectives have emerged? That's something I encourage you to reflect on. And as always, happy exploring.